All right, let me read you a couple things and tell you a couple things about what's going on. The first one I want to tell you about is everything that's in the news, especially yesterday, the Mueller report. How many of you have seen a little bit of it? All right, so here's the deal. The Mueller report actually didn't move the ball at all. And so basically someone put an analogy of it. If you read the book, which is the report, and you saw the movie, the book was better than the movie. Because basically he did absolutely nothing. Matter of fact, I felt pretty sorry for him. The thing he said the most was, could you repeat that question? He's obviously wasn't in control of the report. It's coming out today that, and it was a big loss for the Democrats. It's coming out today. Of course, they won't see that. CNN won't see that. They're continuing to push it. I think that next subpoena that the Democratic Congress is going to put out is to Mueller's dog just to see if he heard anything when he was around. I don't know. They're going to continue to subpoena people. But basically what happened was we know that the people who were working on the report, obviously Mueller wasn't. He didn't even know some of the stuff in the report. So the people that were working on it, now there's an investigation, or they're talking about an investigation, because 85% of them were Democrats. Several of them were supporters of Hillary Clinton, and so not one single Republican worked on the report. And so they're looking at, especially if Mueller didn't have a hand in it, obviously there's some foul play there. So that's the big news on the Mueller report, in spite of what you hear on CNN. Let me give you a little bit more what's going on. World trade without the U.S. This caught my attention. I wanted to bring it to you. This says this: can global trade occur without the blessing of the United States? A newly signed trade deal seems to support that idea. At the recent G20 summit in Osaka, Japan, the European Union, now remember, the European Union could be the revived Roman Empire. Actually, it is, eventually. Signed a milestone trade agreement with 4 South American nations: Argentina, Brazil, which has a tremendous economy, by the way, Paraguay, and Uruguay. The EU continues to work on trade deals and has already completed more than 70 trade deals. Currently, the EU is working on deals with several African nations, Canada, and Vietnam, without the participation of the United States. It got my attention for this reason. We know that the revived Roman Empire is going to be a 10-nation confederacy. We know that it's in Europe, Roman Empire. We know the EU fits pretty much the bill. They're going to have to pare down to 10 nations, but that's possible. As a matter of fact, there's talk about that. We also know that America is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. And it's very important for us to understand that, because the EU can be a tremendous block of nations that controls world trade, especially if they push the United States out. So the United States is not mentioned in Bible prophecy, and I've preached it many times. The reason why would be one of 3 reasons. Either we're raptured and we have a revival in the United States, somebody say hallelujah, or we become extremely secular, like the way we're going right now, and we basically get controlled by another country, or basically, and we get pulled into another country, or we're conquered by another country. So if you look at Scripture, and I'm not predicting this, but if you look at Scripture, especially if you look at Isaiah, you'll find out God's people, many times with God's people, for him to chastise them, he uses a pagan nation as a rod to hit them. So we can see some of that going on, and maybe even see some in America. But this article jumped out at me because of the fact that the EU, and they're excluding the United States from any trade deals. If we get excluded totally on the world, obviously we're going to be an island out there, and it's going to hurt us. All right, let me give you this one. Anybody know who that is? Okay, I got a comment from YouTube this week, and the lady said to me, she said, obviously you are racist, and so by the sound of your congregation, they're racist too. So how many of you feel you're a racist? Listen, I am not a racist. Anybody knows me knows I'm not a racist. And basically, just because I give my opinion about someone who may be black, white, purple, or green, I'm not a racist because they give my opinion. When someone's wrong, they're wrong. It doesn't matter what color they are. When they're right, they're right. So they can use that all they want. And that lady's probably listening. I don't even know why she's listening, to be honest with you. Because you should know that I'm going to go against the squad, because basically they don't represent America. So let me give you some of the articles that came out today. It's shocking enough that this says, Omar comparing DBS, that's the boycott against Israel, to the boycott of the Nazi Germany draws outrage. It's shocking enough that Representative Ilhan Omar proposed a resolution this week that would support the militantly anti-Israeli BDS movement. It is much more shocking that she sought to justify her actions by likening the proposed boycott to America's boycott of the Nazis as they were slaughtering Jews. Has she no social awareness? I can answer that. No moral clarity, no understanding of the glaring hypocrisy of her proposal. Equating with Israel with the Nazis. Yes, Omar suggested it is our moral conscience that caused us to stand against the evil of Nazis back then. It's our moral conscience that should cause us to stand against the evil Israelis today. Back then, the Jews were getting slaughtered by the Nazis. Today, the Jews, she says, in Israel are just like the Nazis. Seriously, how could you even compare that? You've been studying about Nazi Germany. You'll study about it tonight. There's no comparison. Israel does so much for Palestinians, it's not even funny. Matter of fact, Palestinians would rather, the poll says 80% of Palestinians would rather be under the government of Israel than the Palestinian government. And so, listen, she goes on. To quote her directly, we are introducing a resolution to really speak about the American values that support and believe in our ability to exercise our First Amendment rights in regard to boycotting, Omar told Al Monitor News. And it is an opportunity for us to explain why it is we support a non-violent movement, which is the DBS movement, BDS. She continued, Americans of conscience have a proud history of participating in boycotts to advocate for human rights abroad, including boycotting Nazi Germany from 1933 to October 1941. Today, however, it is the Israelis who have taken the place of the Nazis, dehumanizing the Palestinians in like fashion. There is no way you can make that similarity. None at all. We need to put the squeeze on them. What shocking, mindless comparisons. What an utterly inappropriate analogy. But for her to propose supporting BDS as an elected official of the United States is absolutely outrageous and against our Constitution, by the way. And as for her to compare BDS movement to Americans' boycott of the Nazis, and by the way, we also boycotted the Soviets, is beyond the pale. This is what Omar, a Muslim of Somali background, is defending. Israel, she says, is an oppressive apartheid state. Therefore, it is good and moral and righteous to boycott, divest, and sanction this aggressive, evil regime, a regime that can be likened to the Nazis and the communists at their worst. As for the Palestinians, who were displaced in 1948 when the Arab nations declared war on the fledgling state of Israel, they've grown from roughly 600,000 to more than 6 million today. And by the way, that's with the help of Israel. They've gotten so much humanitarian aid, it's not even funny to the Palestinians. And despite many ways in which Israel can improve its dealings with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, Palestinians living in Israel strongly favor the Israeli government over the Palestinian government. I just gave you the statistic. Also, when Israeli companies are able to work freely in Palestinian communities, it brings economic improvement for everyone. But these details, as important as they are mere trivialities when compared to the bigger picture at hand, namely, Representative Omar's glaring anti-Jewish blind spot. So another article came out about her this week, and you can read the text on this one. She said, Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see evil doings of Israel. Let me tell you something. Allah can't awaken anybody, because Allah is a false God. And I'm sure that lady is going to write to me, and that's okay. Write to me. I'll prove it to you historically. So this one came out and says, is Ilhan Omar a failed American experiment? Is Omar a failed American experiment? Clarion national correspondent Shireen Kudosi thinks so. Amidst the media fervor over President Trump's suggestion that Omar, due to her anti-Americanism, should go back to her home country of Somalia, Kudosi's comments were flagged by a number of outlets. Kudosi, who herself is a Muslim, also noted that based on Omar's own rhetoric against America, send her back was not a racist statement, but rather a common sense message. Omar is again in the news for introducing the Congress promoting the boycott. Despite having predominantly lived in the United States, Omar still carries the broken value systems of all third world Muslim countries when it comes to how the Jews are viewed. It goes on to say this: Islamists have understood well how to couple Muslim anti-Semitism with the American left's vague notion of social justice. They have succeeded in couching their agenda in the progressive framework of the oppressed versus the oppressor. Identity politics and victimhood culture also provide Islamists with the vocabulary to deflect their critics with accusations of Islamophobia, white privilege, and insensitivity. Omar is a classic case. Steeped in anti-Semitism as a child, it appears that she brought into the same ideals into the Islamic ideology as an adult. So is Omar a failed American experiment? To the extent that she has not integrated American values, particularly those of the Constitution, which, listen, specifically forbids government and government officials of the United States to discriminate on the basis of sex, race, or religion. The answer is she is. She is a failed American project. So basically we are seeing somebody, and I actually think that she's helping, her and the squad are helping Donald Trump get elected in 2020. If I didn't know any better, I think she's being paid by the Republican Party. She's splitting the Democratic Party. Now she's going to have a meeting with Pelosi. It was supposed to be Friday, or it was supposed to be today. It's going to be Friday, because Pelosi and the squad don't get along. Because Pelosi is more a centrist, which obviously a traditional centrist Democrat, and these are left-wing all the way out there. So the Democratic Party is splitting itself. It's almost like having a third person run for the presidency. Like, remember Ross Perot, who ruined the vote? You're going to see this Democratic Party implode, and it's starting to do it right now. I would not be surprised if a third party emerges from the Democratic Party. I would not be surprised. Let me give you a little bit about money and what's happening on our economy. That looks like it's fun, doesn't it? Know what that guy's doing? He's getting an implant in his hand. Swedes are getting implants in their hands to replace cash and credit cards. More than 14,000 people have already had the sci-fi-ish chips about the size of a grain of rice inserted into their hands, with the pioneers predicting millions will soon join them as they hope to take it globally. Like glorified smartwatches, the chips help Swedes monitor their health and even replace key cards to allow them to enter their offices and buildings. Where did you hear that before? I predicted that about 2 years ago. I said sooner or later it's going to happen. They can just swipe their hand against any type of computer, it'll come back up, won't need any type of passwords, swipe their hand against the lock on their doors and they can get in. That's what's happening here. They have particularly caught on, however, by enabling owners to pay in stores with a simple swipe of the hand. A big deal in a forward-looking country that is moving toward eliminating cash. And again, in economy, this is a big news. Nobody's telling it to you, but it is big news. Deutsche Bank collapse could crash global financial markets. Could it be possible that we're on the verge of the next Lehman Brothers moment? Deutsche Bank is the most important bank in all of Europe. It has $49 trillion in exposures to derivatives, and most of the largest too big to fail banks in the United States have very deep financial connections to the bank. In other words, the global financial system simply cannot afford for Deutsche Bank to fail, and right now it is literally melting down right in front of our eyes. Even though it has been hit by scandal after scandal, somehow Deutsche Bank was able to survive until now. But after what we have witnessed in recent days, many now believe that the end is near for Deutsche Bank. On July 7th, they really shook up investors all over the globe when they laid off 18,000 employees and announced that they would be completely exiting their global equities trading business. It takes a lot to rattle Wall Street, but Deutsche Bank managed to do so. The beleaguered German giant announced on July 7th that it is laying off these 18,000 employees, roughly 1/5 of its global workforce, and pursuing vast restructuring plan that most notably includes shutting down its global equities trading business. That may sound like, so what, who cares? Just listen a little bit further and you'll see. These moves may delay Deutsche Bank's inexorable march into oblivion, but not by much. And as Deutsche Bank collapses, it could take a whole lot of others down with it at the same time. According to Wall Street on Parade, again, the bank has $49 trillion of exposure in derivatives as the end of last year. A derivatives book of $49 trillion puts Deutsche Bank in the same league as the bank holding companies' U.S. juggernauts, JP Morgan Chase, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs, which logged in at $48 trillion, $47 trillion, and $42 trillion respectively at the end of 2008. So how does it affect us? Well, I want to just tell you this because it's coming. I know that most Americans don't really care if Deutsche Bank lives or dies, but as the New York Post has pointed out, the failure of Deutsche Bank could quickly become a major crisis for the entire global financial system. The more important factor, remember, is that Deutsche Bank traded these derivatives with other financial firms. So they're locked into other firms, and other firms are locked into them. So if they go down, those firms will go down. So is this going to be another Lehman Brothers situation whereby one bank's problems becomes another bank's problems? If the situation gets out of hand, the Federal Reserve and other central banks will have no choice but to cut interest rates, even if it's not the best thing for the world economies. In particular, some of the largest too big to fail banks in the United States are heavily interconnected financially to Deutsche Bank. The following comes from the Wall Street on Parade. We know that Deutsche Bank's derivative tentacles extended to most of the major Wall Street banks. Deutsche Bank is heavily interconnected financially to JP Morgan Chase, to Citigroup, to Goldman Sachs, to Morgan Stanley and the Bank of America, as well as many mega banks in Europe. And so we're watching something that could absolutely bring us right back down to a recession as in 2008, a too big to fail bank. And by the way, Deutsche Bank will not be bailed out by Germany. The reason why is because Germany is part of the European Economic Community, and they are not going to take all the funds of other nations and bail them out. So it could be pretty bad for everybody. Let me go a little bit further and tell you a little bit about war. The next war front, Israel versus Hezbollah. War drums. Hezbollah deploys forces along Israel's northern border. So I won't read it all to you, but let me tell you what's happening. Hezbollah is taking their people and their soldiers, and they're amassing them around the Golan Heights, right over the Golan Heights. And so what they're doing is they're aided by Iran and they're aided by Syria. But Hezbollah knows they need a war for this reason, because Hezbollah has most of their finances come from Iran. And President Trump has squeezed Iran so much that they stopped paying Hezbollah. And that's a good thing, by the way. So Hezbollah has cut their soldiers' pay in half. They get 50% of what they used to get. And so they know that a war could be something that would enhance their cause, and also they're looking to take over places. As silly as that sounds, they're looking to do it. Their war is going to come to Israel. Again, if you look prophetically in Psalm 83, we know that there's going to be a war and a combination of countries that will come down on Israel from the north. They're directly north of Israel. And so here's what happened. In a speech last Friday marking the 13th anniversary of the 2006 Second Lebanese War, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah boasted of the terrorist organization's expanded military capabilities and threatened that another war would bring Israel to the brink of extinction. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu immediately responded on Sunday by threatening to deal Lebanon and Hezbollah a crushing military blow if Hezbollah attacks. And so basically that's exactly what they'll do. Let me remind you that Israel is armed, is nuclear, Hezbollah is not. And nuclear weapons aren't necessarily something that we think we can survive, but we can. There are small nuclear arms that can wipe out just several blocks at a time. Not a good thing, and I'm not saying Israel will use them, but Israel is so capable because they have every single one of America's technologies. And so they're ready for them. Hezbollah did a sneak attack last time, but they're ready for them. All right, so how many of you are tired of all the LGBTQRSTSPRZ? How many are tired of it? I'm tired of it. So here, I know it's going to back up on itself. It's already doing it. There's big problems coming because they're messing up so many systems. This is one of them. This one is in the news. Will topless LGBT swim for ages 12 to 24 finally wake people up? The battle for our children's hearts and minds continue at public libraries across the nation as Drag Queen Story Hour expands and becomes even more alarming. So what the LGBT community did is they're targeting our children. And that's pretty smart by them. To be honest with you, it's devious, but it's smart. Because if you affect the children, then those children will grow up and they'll affect their society. So they know what they're doing in doing that. We're not targeting those kids, but they are. Let me give you a perfect example. Cheryl and I were in Niagara Falls last week with several couples, and we were sitting around at the lobby waiting to go someplace, and there was a young woman and her husband with a tiny baby that was there, 9-month-old baby. And we had a great conversation. It went on for probably 10 minutes. And we were back and forth talking about the baby and how cute the baby was. And someone said, well, you better be careful. She's a cutie. There's going to be boys calling on her pretty soon, you know, just in fun. The woman said this unabashedly without even thinking, well, whether it's boys or whether it's girls, I want to be able to be open to whatever she wants. That is, I had to almost tie Cheryl down. I could see her mouth quivering. She was ready to say something. Well, the conversation stopped just like that. But this is the mindset, and we're seeing it. And so parents are just as much to blame. But listen to this. St. John's Library in Portland, Oregon is one example where story time has evolved beyond reading pro-gay and pro-transgender books, as little kids were permitted to frolic on the floor and lie on top of a man dressed as a woman. Let me tell you something else that's happening here that we don't see. Underneath the LGBT shell is pedophilia, and this is exactly what this is. So parents are so desperate to prove that they are LGBT friendly that they will allow their children to crawl on top of a random stranger. So what is the next event these parents will be taking their children to in order to prove their pro-LGBT credentials? How about a topless swim for ages 12 to 24 with gender-inclusive changing rooms and all parents banned? If I was a parent, that should tell me something. The event is called Youth All Body Swim. It's been scheduled to take place this past Sunday in Langley, British Columbia. According to the event details, it gave an open invitation to all youth ages 12 to 24, stipulating that anything from the waist down was required to be covered. Gender-inclusive change rooms would be open to all. Parents and guardians, however, were informed they would not be allowed to stay. Event organizers attempted to promote this event as being non-judgmental. It's not non-judgmental, it's sick, in an effort to lay a guilt trip on anyone who might criticize the event, but it didn't work. And I'm so glad it didn't. Thankfully, this still drew enough community protest that the event was canceled. Due to community response, we feel we can no longer offer a safe and comfortable environment for the youth that wish to attend a Youth All Body Swim. and therefore will be postponing the event. Let me tell you what's happening. There's a growing fear that much of this force feed of perversion, whether through drag queen story hours or topless swims, is an attempt to normalize inappropriate adult-child interactions, setting the stage for pedophilia. So the LGBT community, and I'm going to read a little bit more, is really its own worst enemy. Let me tell you why. They keep pushing the envelope, and people are accepting it because most people are not Christians. They'll accept it. But when you push the envelope a little too much, you're going to get a backlash, and we're starting to see it. So here's another one. This new pedophile acceptance is now being promoted with a more acceptable term, age gap love. Britain's M5 network has even done an episode of their show called Age Gap Love, which was promoted on social media with a tag 16 and 44. It's a big gap. But this didn't stop Andy and Beth from giving Age Gap Love a go. Originally a friend of her mom, over the years, Andy became close to her children too. This show explains of Andy, who is 44, and has a relationship with Beth, who is 16. That's statutory rape, by the way. Hundreds of social media commentaries responded to M5's tone-deaf tweet and called it out for exactly what it is. Lowering the age of consent is a big part of the pedophile acceptance movement in both Canada and the UK. And again, I think it's really going to backfire on them. So speaking of that, what do you think that is? Male or female? Be careful, you can be sued. Listen to it. Doctor fired for refusing to call a bearded man madam. A Christian doctor has been fired from his government's position for saying he would decline a transgender person's demand to use preferred pronouns. Dr. David Mackreth of the United Kingdom lost his contract with the Department of Work and Pensions as a disability benefit assessor after a manager posed a hypothetical conversation to him. He said, if you have a man 6 foot tall with a beard who says he wants to be addressed as she and Mrs., would you do that? The manager asked. McCrea, 56, father of 4, said he would decline the request, resulting in his firing. He now works in an emergency room in Shropshire and is suing the government for discrimination on the grounds of his religious beliefs were violated. You also have First Amendment rights. You also have the freedom of speech. You don't have to do anything because it's politically correct. Okay, let me give you this next one. How kids, and this one really is a proof. I pulled it out because it's a proof against the LGBTQ, whatever, community. Listen, this is what it says. How kids change dad. Family is written in our bodies and our brains. I love when science backs scripture. Listen to it. While the loudest voices in our culture continue to insist that men and women are interchangeable, science is offering more evidence than ever that the two sexes are anything but interchangeable. Nowhere is this uniqueness more apparent than in the distinct and very real transformations that both men and women undergo on becoming parents. Of course, having children changes a woman, both body and mind, but it turns out from all the studies that men experience changes too. They may not be as outwardly obvious as those of women, but they are dramatic and life-altering. Writing at the New York Times, Oxford anthropologist Anne Animation cites a decade of findings on how men are designed to respond physically, emotionally, and neurologically to the arrival of a baby. And those changes she observes aren't the same as those seen in women. For example, a 5-year study of over 6,000 men in the Philippines found that those who became fathers experienced a significant drop in testosterone, the hormone associated with male aggression, strength, and sex drive. It also marked a critical transition in a father's behavior. Lower testosterone makes way for a cast of new hormones that draw him toward his partner and infant and encourage him to participate in caregiving and baby-related household tasks. Mason pointed to studies indicating that the lower a man's testosterone, the more likely his brain is to experience surges of bonding and reward hormones like oxytocin and dopamine when he spends time with his child. It says, but here's where things become really interesting and where science is showing how biologically distinct dads are from moms. A 2012 study by Israeli neuroscientists found that the parts of the brain that light up most dramatically in fathers aren't those most active in mothers. They're different. For moms, regions closer to the core of the brain, which enable them to care, nurture, and detect risk, were very active. But for dads, the parts that shone most brightly were located on the outer surface of the brain, where higher, more conscious cognitive functions sit, such as thought, goal orientation, planning, and problem solving. This difference between maternal and paternal brain activity, she writes, may reflect the difference in roles, the different but equally strong attachments between mothers and fathers. The old cliche that kids run to mom for hugs and kisses when they scrape their knees, and to dad when they want to play and laugh, may have more basis in biology than many would admit. A woman's oxytocin and dopamine peak when nurturing and comforting her children. For a man, the same hormones peak when he engages in a horseplay with his children. Mason writes that wrestling with dad not only cements bonds between father and child, but also plays crucial roles in a child's social development. All this talk of roles and difference between moms and dads, and it was published in the liberal New York Times of all places. And it isn't politically correct, but it really often isn't. Nation attributes this evolution, obviously, to evolution, but Christians recognize the design of God. God made us this way. He made us male and female, not male who wants to be a female, not females who want to be a male. And so not because you identify a certain way. That's the way God made us, who made us male and female and who inscribed the family into our very DNA. So it's pretty powerful stuff. All right, how many of you like to eat fish? Not after tonight. All right, not after tonight, you're not going to want to eat fish. Let me tell you why. I don't know if that's in there somewhere. I don't have the picture of it, but let me show you. I do have the picture. It's over here. Hold on one second. No, I don't have it. All right, let me read it to you and tell you what's going on. Chemicals contaminate South African fish. By the way, a great percentage of our fish, from McDonald's to Captain D's, they all contain fish. I'll get some cards and letters from that one, I promise you. According to a study by the chemistry department of the University of Western Cape in South Africa, fish caught by commercial fishermen off the Cape are contaminated by antibiotics, painkillers, antiretrovirals, disinfectants, and industrial chemicals. Some of these chemicals were detected in high amounts of fish fillet, the muscular portion generally eaten by humans. Recent testing in stormwater systems is one area also revealed that E. coli levels were as high as would be expected in raw sewage. The contamination of South African fish is sobering, but it's not unique. More and more man-made chemicals are appearing in drinking water and also in fish and other mammals. Let me stop there. I got a copy of Consumer Reports, and we have been hoodwinked. Most of us drink bottled water. The results are coming back that almost all bottled water has more arsenic in it than your tap water. And so, but we've been hoodwinked to think that that's the best for us. Let me go on. And that are exposed to human waste and industrial and agricultural runoff. As the Apostle Paul noted to the Romans, the whole creation is growing in agony and it awaits the return of Jesus Christ. So why would that happen and not go unchecked? It's one word, greed. People want to continue to sell things and basically they don't really care. I promise you they're not eating those fish themselves. Let me give you another one that I actually wanted to tell you about. This is kind of long, but I want you to hear it. This is end times complacency spreading throughout the church. It seems a lot of churches and a lot of Christians and a lot of pastors don't believe that we're in the end times, that Jesus is coming back. Let me tell you why. In 1970, Hal Lindsey published The Late Great Planet Earth. The book sold millions of copies and introduced a generation to the miraculous fulfillment of end-time Bible prophecies in our day and time. Coming on the heels of World War II, the rebirth of Israel, the Six-Day War, and widespread societal upheaval, many were convinced the rapture would take place before the end of the decade. But the 70s came and went, and Jesus didn't return. Then in the 1980s and 90s, numerous Bible prophecy books with titles like Countdown to Armageddon and Final Warning sold all over the world. Again, many people were convinced Jesus would return before the end of the century, yet Jesus didn't come back. Then the world experienced Y2K, the September 11th terrorist attacks, and the phenomenal success of the Left Behind series. Once again, it seemed as though Jesus would return at any moment, but once again, he didn't. And then something happened. Complacency set in the church. End time burnout. Because Jesus hasn't come, many Christians began to openly doubt whether he ever would come. Why? There's two reasons. First, we live in a culture that demands instant gratification. We don't like to wait as little as 2 minutes for a microwave to cook a meal it took our grandparents half a day to prepare. We're impatient and we're used to getting what we want when we want it. Second reason is the errant prediction of date setters. False prophets such as Harold Camping and Edgar Whisenant. He wrote a book called 88 Reasons Why Jesus Should Come Back in 1988. That said that Jesus will return on a specific date, even though Jesus said no one knows the day or the hour, and that's in Matthew 24:36. The media gives widespread attention to these predictions. When these days come and go, the false prophets are exposed. This leads to ridicule of Bible prophecy, and in some cases, even Christian leaders publicly dismiss Bible prophecy as a playground for crackpots and the ignorant. But these critics forget false prophets made these claims, not the Bible. The Bible's track record remains perfect. In fact, the Bible predicted this very complacency long ago. The Bible said it would happen. Almost 2,000 years ago, Peter issued a warning. He said, in the last days, people will deny the signs we see today. He said they'll mock the idea of Jesus returning, they'll make fun of those who believe in the second coming, and they'll say exactly the things we're hearing today, like, I thought Jesus was coming back, what happened to his promise? Generation after generation has said he's coming, yet since the beginning of the world, everything has remained the same, 2 Peter chapter 3. You've probably heard variations of this complaint yourself. Maybe you've heard it in church, but is it true? No, it's not. Nothing could be further from the truth. Are things the same as they always have been? To say the world is the same today as in years past, that we don't live in unique times, is just not true. More than any other generation, ours has a reason to expect the second coming of Jesus. And the prophet said to look for specific signs heralding his coming. For over 1,800 years, you couldn't find one of those signs they said to look for. Today, in one form or another, you can find all of them. And by the way, our news based on those. We're talking about money changing. We're talking about a universal currency. We're talking about nations rising up. We're talking, all those things are Bible prophecies. I used to look for articles like that. I couldn't find them 20 years ago. Now I have so many, I don't know how many, I don't know, I have to pare them down to bring them to you. So here's some of the things. You've heard me preach these before. The Jewish people back in the land. I won't elaborate on it, but that's Jeremiah 23:7, Ezekiel 39:28, Isaiah 11:12, Psalm 107:3, all the prophecies. Ezekiel 20 verse 34, Isaiah 11:11. The Jewish people back in Jerusalem, that's in Luke 21:28. And that happened in 1967, that they came back to Jerusalem and took that back from the West Bank, from Jordan. And now we have them actually having Jerusalem as their capital. You were living in that day. And so basically we're living straight in the days that Jesus told us. The gospel preached throughout the world, Matthew 24. In the past 2 centuries, Christians have carried the gospel to every single country on earth. Today, missionaries live in every nation. The Bible's translated into hundreds of languages. And the message of Jesus is sent around the world by radio, TV, satellite, and the internet. Our generation is the very first one on the verge of spreading the gospel to every single last person on earth. Increased travel and knowledge, Daniel 12:4. Up till about 200 years ago, a man could travel no faster than a horse could carry him. Today, we can travel faster than the speed of sound. Many consider the Library of Alexandria, in Egypt by the way, to be the greatest collection of written knowledge in the ancient world. Some estimates say it was as many as 500,000 papyrus scrolls. 2,000 years ago, this was the height of human knowledge. Today, you probably have a bigger library in your pocket. Your smartphone can download almost any book that's ever been written in a matter of seconds. Our generation has experienced an exponential increase in travel and knowledge. Israel surrounded by enemies. According to the Bible, enemies will surround Israel in the last days. Psalm 83:4 tells us that. Psalm 83:12, Ezekiel 11:14, Ezekiel 35:10. Ever since the rebirth of Israel in 1948, the daily headlines have included these exact statements. Israel's Muslim neighbors claim the land of Israel for themselves, and they have no regard of the God of Israel. Israel's exceedingly great army. Ezekiel said in the last days Israel will field an exceedingly great army, Ezekiel 37. By the way, since 1948, before 1948, they didn't have one soldier in their army. Zechariah said Israel will be like a fire among sheaves of grain, burning up neighborhood nations, Zechariah 12. And even the weakest Israeli soldier will be like David, Zechariah 12:8. Since 1948, Israel has fought no less than 14 conventional wars against its neighbors. Despite being outnumbered more than 50-1, Israel has achieved overwhelming victory every time. Rise of Gog and Magog alliance. The Bible says a military alliance that includes Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and a number of Muslim nations will attack Israel in the latter days. That's Ezekiel 38:8. It's Ezekiel 39:27. Today we see those exact nations coming together. Today is an alliance that has never existed in world history. Russia and Turkey have made an alliance in the last 3 years that have never existed in history of the planet. Rise of the United Europe. I just told you about the European nation. Listen to it. European Union. In the end times, Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Revelation 17, according to Daniel, it will be a 10-nation alliance of weak and strong nations. Man, you can't get any more specific. The EU is made up of weak and strong nations. That's exactly what Daniel predicted. Legs of iron and clay. And so toes of iron and clay. So they're weak and they're strong. That's exactly what the EU is today. We see the initial stages of this alliance in the European Union, the legal and cultural inheritor of the Roman Empire's legacy. The EU today is a coalition of both weak and strong nations, a volatile alliance that struggles to stay together. The rise of global government. Bible says a single government will rule the world politically, Revelation 13. Religiously, 13:7. Religiously, 13:8. Economically, 13:16 and 17 in the last days. It will rule all people and all tribes and languages on the face of the earth. Its authority will be so complete no one will be able to buy or sell anything without its permission. I've been telling you about chipping and the doing away of cash. That's all funneling towards that global economic government. For centuries, a true global government was impossible. Today, world leaders openly discuss it, and the technology exists to implement the rule and rule such a government. If the signs are telling us the tribulation and the second coming are near, then it means the rapture is even closer. Somebody say amen. So don't fall asleep, and don't let anyone around you fall asleep. It's never been more important to stay awake. Jesus is coming. Alone, these signs indicate the end times are near. Together, they prove ours is the end time generation. I like to call it the Omega generation, the last generation. Jesus himself said to look for these signs. He said, when you see them, know that your return is near, Matthew 24. In fact, he said, the generation, which is us, that sees these signs will not pass away before he returns. This convergence of signs is the number one reason to believe our generation is on the verge of witnessing the second coming. Now, it's pretty powerful stuff. Speaking of that, here's another sign. That's an asteroid. How many of you, who knows where the asteroids are? Where do they live? In between what? Jupiter and Mars. Very good. So there's a planet that broke up. I'll give you a little science lesson before we go on. There's a planet that broke up long ago in between Jupiter and Mars. As it broke up, it fragmented into millions of asteroids, we call them today. And basically, they orbit around the sun. But every now and then, they fall out of orbit. As they fall out of orbit, they're pulled in by the inner planet's gravity, and then they're pulled in by the sun's massive gravity. So they're headed towards the sun. They will actually, if they miss us, because we're rotating the sun, if they miss us, they will burn up as they get into the sun's corona. We have another thing that's called the Oort cloud, O-O-R-T. That exists beyond Pluto. It is a huge cloud that we have no idea what's beyond it, but we know the comets come through there. They are circling our sun, like Halley's Comet, every 76 years. Then they're going out and circling another sun that we may not even know where it is. Those comets don't get burned up by the sun, but their tail turns and they go back out. So there's two types of bodies that come earthbound. We have asteroids and comets. At any given time, if we're in the right position, we can get hit by any one of those, which would be life-threatening on planet Earth. So it's amazing, and scientists tell us it's amazing we've lasted this long, because there are literally not so many, the comets, there's probably a couple hundred, but there are literally millions of asteroids hurtling towards the sun. NASA this week discovers an average, I'll tell you first, they discovered an average of 30 near-Earth objects every week, NEOs. So these things come in. Now, most of them are not near the Earth. They're coming outside of our orbit, or we're over here and they're over here, or on the backside of the sun they come in. No threat to us. But they discover 30 a week of near-Earth objects. Let me just tell you this. That's only about 10% of all the ones they can see. Most of the time, they can't see them until they pass us. So you're talking about 70 to 80% of objects, we can't even see them coming in, yet they're coming towards us. So obviously, there's a potential hazard. If our orbit comes to the spot where they're coming in, then they're going to hit us. Not too long ago, about a decade ago, Schumacher-Levy asteroid hit Jupiter. You could see it from a small backyard telescope. Jupiter has this huge actually it was a comet that hit it, has this huge solar storm on it. It actually changed the direction of the storm. It hit 7 times. So if that would have hit the Earth, it would have destroyed the Earth totally. So listen to this. In June, a potentially hazardous asteroid flew by the Earth at a distance of 4.2 miles. That is extremely close in astronomical terms. That's like a hairbreadth. A month earlier, an asteroid so large it had its own moon, a moon was revolving around it, came hurtling towards the Earth but never got within 5 million miles. But the article goes on and it says this. It says, estimated at 360 feet wide, asteroid 2015 HM10, they name them that way because there's so many, is expected to fly past our planet on Wednesday. And it did. Yesterday, it flew past our planet, according to NASA's Center for Near-Earth Object Studies. But the next asteroid, 2019 OD, will be only 222,000 miles from the Earth on July 24th. Now, the moon is only 260,000 miles away. So it actually, if the moon's in the right position, it can pass in between the moon and the Earth. You're going to be able to see this one. And so if it tumbles the wrong way, it could strike the Earth. By the way, it doesn't have to strike the Earth to hurt the Earth. It could strike the moon. If it throws the moon out of phase, then basically that could hurt the Earth. All of our tides are based on the moon. There's a magnetic pull that goes back and forth. So it's only an act of God that we are still here. Somebody say amen. But we know another one's coming, much smaller in size, will be traveling at much more modest speed. This is going to come, and it's going to trail that one at 2019. So it has one, and right behind it is another one. Again, it's only the hand of God that keeps us preserved. But if you read Revelation, one does hit in the tribulation. It's called wormwood. It makes the waters bitter. So aren't you thankful you're on the right side tonight? I am. Aren't you thankful that I believe God's going to rapture us before that time. Somebody say amen. Amen. How many believe the rapture can be right around the corner? Did you know one of the 5 crowns of Scripture you can get is for anticipating the rapture? You get a crown for anticipating Christ coming back. That's in the news for tonight. I'm going to ask the ushers if they come forward.